Being wealthy or having financial freedom has a lot to do with how you behave, not how smart you are or how hard you work. Even if you are a financial genius with a certain field of knowledge, if you lack behavioral skills, it can be a financial nightmare. In this video, we will talk about a book, The Psychology of Money, written by Housel. The Psychology of Money demonstrates that human behavior plays a big role in financial success or failure. And the best thing of this book is that it explicitly links personal finance with psychology. Each of the book's first 18 chapters delves into a different aspect of human behavior or attitude toward money. Some lessons warn us about certain behaviors, while others encourage us to adopt healthy habits. Saving, investment strategies, decision-making. These have all been known as key parts of personal finance. But the psychological side is rarely explored, and that's what this book is all about. With that said, let's start the book summary of The Psychology of Money. No one's crazy. People do some crazy things with money, and we think that they are crazy. But no one is crazy. People from different generations, raised by different parents who earned different incomes and held different values in different parts of the world, born into different economies, experiencing different job markets with different incentives and different degrees of luck, learn very different lessons. Everyone has their own unique experience with how the world works, and what you have experienced is more compelling than what you learned secondhand. The person who grew up in poverty has a different perspective on risk and return. The person who grew up when inflation was high experienced something the person who grew up with stable prices never had to. Your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.000000000.1% of what's happened in the world, but maybe 80% of how you think the world works. The economists found that people's lifetime investment decisions are heavily anchored to the experiences those investors had in their own generation, especially experiences early in their adult life. If you grew up when inflation was high, you invested less of your money in bonds later in life compared to those who grew up when inflation was low. If you happened to grow up when the stock market was strong, you invested more of your money in stocks later in life compared to those who grew up when stocks were weak. Author says, we all do crazy stuff with money because we're all relatively new to this game. And what looks crazy to you might make sense to me. But no one is crazy. We all make decisions based on our own unique experiences that seem to make sense to us in a given moment. Luck and risk. Luck and risk are siblings. They are both the reality that every outcome in life is guided by forces other than individual effort. If you acknowledge that luck brought you success, then you have to believe in luck cousin, risk, because risk can turn your story just as quickly as luck. The author demonstrates this by telling the story of Bill Gates. Bill Gates had a significant amount of luck to be at a school that had a computer. The school name is Lakeside School. Bill Gates might not have had the same career success if it hadn't been for the efforts of a teacher, Bill Dougal, to procure a $3,000 teletype computer. Gates was 13 years old in 1968 when he met classmate Paul Allen. Allen was also obsessed with the school's computer, and the two hit it off. Lakeside's computer wasn't part of its general curriculum. It was an independent study program. Bill and Paul could toy away with the thing at their leisure, letting their creativity run wild after school, late into the night on weekends. They quickly became computing experts. 1 in a million high school-age students attended the high school that had the combination of cash and foresight to buy a computer. Bill Gates happened to be one of them. Bill Gates and Paul Allen became household names thanks to Microsoft's success. But back at Lakeside, there was a third member of this gang of high school computer prodigies, whose name was Kent Evans. Kent Evans and Bill Gates became best friends in 8th grade. Kent was expected to be an integral part of Gates' entrepreneurship journey. He could have been a founding partner of Microsoft with Gates and Allen, but it would never happen. Kent died in a mountaineering accident before he graduated high school. Every year, there are around 36 mountaineering deaths in the United States. The odds of being killed on a mountain in high school are roughly 1 in a million. Bill Gates experienced 1 in a million luck by ending up at Lakeside. Kent Evans experienced 1 in a million risk by never getting to finish what he and Gates set out to achieve. The same force, the same magnitude, working in opposite directions. Bill Gates himself accepts that if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft. Never enough. John Bogle, the Vanguard founder who passed away in 2019, once told a story about money that highlights something we don't think about enough. At a party hosted by a billionaire, Kurt Vonnegut informs his pal Joseph Heller that their host, a hedge fund manager, had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly popular novel, Catch-22, over its whole history. Heller responds, "Yes, but I have something he will never have: enough." Author says the hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving, and social comparison is the problem here. Comparing ourselves to others is often the culprit. Capitalism is good at generating both wealth and envy. But social comparison is a process without end. There's always a bigger fish. Comparison is the thief of all joy. And to do that, you have to stop comparing yourself to others and start determining what is enough for yourself. Confounding compounding. Compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. Don't underestimate it. Author says, as I write this, Warren Buffett's net worth is $84.5 billion. Of that, $84.2 billion was accumulated after his 50th birthday. $81.5 billion came after he qualified for Social Security in his mid-60s. Buffett's fortune isn't due to just being a good investor, but being a good investor since he was literally a child. Warren Buffett is a phenomenal investor. But you miss a key point if you attach all of his success to investing acumen. The real key to his success is that he's been a phenomenal investor for 3/4 of a century. Had he started investing in his 30s and retired in his 60s, few people would have ever heard of him. It's not only about hitting home runs and raking in huge profits when it comes to investing. It's all about staying in the game for the long haul and allowing your money compound. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. There are a million ways to get wealthy, and plenty of books on how to do so. But there's only one way to stay wealthy. Some combination of frugality and paranoia. Everyone knows how Warren Buffett became wealthy through his investments, but no one knows how he stays wealthy in any circumstances, such as a market crash, recession, or other economic downturn. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are two of the best-known investment gurus today. But 40 years ago, there was a third member of the group, Rick Guerin. Rick Guerin was a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. In the 1973-1974 downturn, Rick was levered with margin loans. And the stock market went down almost 70% in those 2 years, so he got margin calls. He sold his Berkshire stock to Warren. Warren actually said, "I bought Rick's Berkshire stock at under $40 a piece." Rick was forced to sell because he was levered. Charlie, Warren, and Rick were equally skilled at getting wealthy. But Warren and Charlie had the added skill of staying wealthy, which over time is the skill that matters most. Nassim Taleb put it this way: having an edge and surviving are two different things. The first requires the second. You need to avoid ruin at all costs. Planning is important, but the most important part of every plan is to plan on the plan not going according to plan. Tails, you win. Anything that is huge, profitable, famous, or influential is the result of a tail event, an outlying one in thousands or millions event. And most of our attention goes to things that are huge, profitable, famous, or influential. When most of what we pay attention to is the result of a tail, it's easy to underestimate how rare and powerful they are. By 1990s and 2000, Heinz Berggren became one of the most successful art dealers of all time by selling parts of his massive collection of Picassos, Braques, Klees, and Matisses to the German government for more than 100 million euros. Perhaps 99% of the works someone like Berggren acquired in his life turned out to be of little value. But that doesn't particularly matter if the other 1% turn out to be the work of someone like Picasso. Berggren could be wrong most of the time and still end up stupendously right. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. There are 100 billion planets in our galaxy and only one, as far as we know, with intelligent life. Freedom. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, "I can do whatever I want today." The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, is priceless. It is the highest dividend money pays. Money's greatest intrinsic value, and this can't be overstated, is its ability to give you control over your time. To obtain, bit by bit, a level of independence and autonomy that comes from unspent assets that give you greater control over what you can do and when you can do it. A small amount of wealth means the ability to take a few days off work when you're sick without breaking the bank. Gaining that ability is huge if you don't have it. A bit more means waiting for a good job to come around after you get laid off rather than having to take the first one you find. They can be life-changing. 6 months emergency expenses means not being terrified of your boss, because you know you won't be ruined if you have to take some time off to find a new job. Take it from those who have lived through everything, controlling your time is the highest dividend money pays. Man in the car paradox. When you see someone driving a nice car, you rarely think, wow, the guy driving that car is cool. Instead, you think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool. Subconscious or not, this is how people think. There is a paradox here. People tend to want wealth to signal to others that they should be liked and admired. But in reality, those other people often bypass admiring you, not because they don't think wealth is admirable, but because they use your wealth as a benchmark for their own desire to be liked and admired. Author further says that my point here is not to abandon the pursuit of wealth, or even fancy cars. I like both. It's a subtle recognition that people generally aspire to be respected and admired by others, and using money to buy fancy things may bring less of it than you imagine. If respect and admiration are your goal, be careful how you seek it. Humility, kindness, and empathy will bring you more respect than horsepower ever will. Wealth is what you don't see. Money has many ironies. Here's an important one. Wealth is what you don't see. If you see a Ferrari driving around, you might intuitively assume the owner of the car is rich, even if you're not paying much attention to them. Author says, but as I got to know some of these people, I realized that wasn't always the case. Many were mediocre successes who spent a huge percentage of their paycheck on a car. Author explains this by sharing a story of Roger. He drove a Porsche, which was enough for people to draw assumptions. Then one day Roger arrived in an old Honda. Same the next week and the next. Author then asked him about his Porsche, and Roger said that it was repossessed after defaulting on his car loan, he said. Every assumption you might have had about him was wrong. Someone driving a $100,000 car might be wealthy, but the only data point you have about their wealth is that they have $100,000 less than they did before they bought the car, or $100,000 more in debt. That's all you know about them. We tend to judge wealth by what we see, because that's the information we have in front of us. We can't see people's bank accounts or brokerage statements. So we rely on outward appearances to gauge financial success. Cars, homes, Instagram photos. Modern capitalism makes helping people fake it until they make it a cherished industry. But the truth is that wealth is what you don't see. Spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. Save money. The only factor you can control generates one of the only things that matters. How wonderful! Past a certain level of income, people fall into 3 groups. Those who save, those who don't think they can save, those who don't think they need to save. The author used an analogy for the 1970s oil crisis. Oil supply was insufficient to keep up with demand and economic growth, but we overcame the oil crisis. The biggest reason we overcame the oil crisis is because we started building cars, factories, and homes that are more energy efficient than they used to be. Oil and gas production has increased 65% since 1975, while conservation and efficiency has more than doubled what we can do with that energy. So it's easy to see which has mattered more. The important thing here is that finding more energy is largely out of our control, but becoming more efficient with the energy we use is largely in our control. The decision to buy a lighter car or ride a bike is up to you and has a 100% chance of improving efficiency. The same is true with our money. Investment returns can make you rich. But whether an investing strategy will work and how long it will work for, and whether markets will cooperate, is always in doubt. Personal savings and frugality, finances, conservation, and efficiency are parts of the money equation that are more in your control and have a 100% chance of being as effective in the future as they are today. Reasonable rational. Do not aim to be coldly rational when making financial decisions. Aim to just be pretty reasonable. Reasonable is more realistic, and you have a better chance of sticking with it for the long run. which is what matters most when managing money. There's a well-documented home bias, where people prefer to invest in companies from the country they live in, while ignoring the other 95% plus of the planet. It's not rational until you consider that investing is effectively giving money to strangers. If familiarity helps you take the leap of faith required to remain backing those strangers, it's reasonable. Surprise. Stanford professor Scott Sagan once said, "Something everyone who follows the economy or investment markets should hang on their wall, things that have never happened before happen all the time." History is mostly the study of surprising events, but it is often used by investors and economists as an unassailable guide to the future. Focusing on past history and past patterns may cause two things. You'll likely miss the outlier events that move the needle the most. Example, 15 billion people were born in the 19th and 20th centuries. But consider the handful that inordinately influenced historical events: Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Edison, Gates, Martin Luther King, etc. Example, consider the projects, events, and innovations of the last century: the Great Depression, World War II, vaccines, antibiotics, the Internet, the fall of the Soviet Union. History can be a misleading guide to the future of the economy and stock market because it doesn't account for structural changes that are relevant to today's world. The 401k is 42 years old. The Roth IRA is younger, created in the 1990s. So personal financial advice and analysis about how Americans save for retirement today is not directly comparable to what made sense just a generation ago. There are new options. Things changed. Or take venture capital. It barely existed 25 years ago. There are single venture capital funds today that are larger than the entire industry was a generation ago. Room for error. The most important part of every plan is planning on your plan, not going according to plan. People underestimate the need for room for error in almost everything they do that involves money. Stock analysts give their clients price targets, not price ranges. Economic forecasters predict things with precise figures, rarely broad probabilities. The pundit who speaks in unshakable certainties will gain a larger following than the one who says, "We can't know for sure," and speaks in probabilities. Two things cause us to avoid room for error. One is the idea that somebody must know what the future holds, driven by the uncomfortable feeling that comes from admitting the opposite. The second is that you're therefore doing yourself harm by not taking actions that fully exploit an accurate view of that future coming true. But room for error is underappreciated and misunderstood. It's often viewed as a conservative hedge used by those who don't want to take much risk or aren't confident in their views. But when used appropriately, it's quite the opposite. Bill Gates understood this well. When Microsoft was a young company, he said, he came up with this incredibly conservative approach that I wanted to have enough money in the bank to pay a year's worth of payroll even if we didn't get any payments coming in. You'll change. Long-term planning is harder than you see because people, goals, and desires change over time. Author says, I grew up with a friend who came from neither privilege nor natural intellect, but was the hardest working guy I knew. These people have a lot to teach because they have an unfiltered understanding of every inch of the road to success. His life's mission and dream as a teenager was to be a doctor. To say the odds were stacked against him is being charitable. No reasonable person at the time would consider it a possibility, and a decade older than his classmates, he eventually became a doctor. But when Author spoke to him a few years ago, and he said, "Awful career," this went on for 10 minutes. The stress and hours had worn him into the ground. He seemed as disappointed in where he is today as he was driven toward where he wanted to be 15 years ago. An underpinning of psychology is that people are poor forecasters of their future selves. Imagining a goal is easy and fun. Imagining a goal in the context of the realistic life stresses that grow with competitive pursuits is something entirely different. This has a big impact on our ability to plan for future financial goals. Only 27% of college grads have a job related to their major, according to the Federal Reserve. 29% of stay-at-home parents have a college degree, and some of them likely regret their education. At every stage of your lives, we make a decision that will influence the people we're going to become, and when we become those people, we are not always thrilled about our past decision. Nothing's free. Everything has a price, but not all prices appear on labels. Everything has a price, and the key to a lot of things with money is just figuring out what that price is and being willing to pay it. The problem is that the price of a lot of things is not obvious until you've experienced them firsthand when the bill is overdue. Like everything else worthwhile, successful investing demands a price. But its currency is not dollars and cents. It's volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, and regret, all of which are easy to overlook until you're dealing with them in real time. The inability to recognize that investing has a price can tempt us to try to get something for nothing, which, like shoplifting, rarely ends well. Every job looks easy when you're not the one doing it, because the challenges faced by someone in the arena are often invisible to those in the crowd. For example, when General Electric's chief executive officer Jeff Immelt, who ran the company since 2001, was criticized for underperformance and stepped down in 2017. After he left organization, the next chief executive officer lasted 14 months. Sometimes it rains at Disneyland, but if you view the admission fee as a fine, you'll never enjoy the magic. Find the price, then pay it. You and me. When a commentator on CNBC says, "You should buy this stock," keep in mind that they do not know who you are. Are you a teenager trading for fun? An elderly widow on a limited budget? A hedge fund manager trying to shore up your books before the quarter ends? Are we supposed to think those three people have the same priorities, and that whatever level a particular stock is trading at is right for all three of them? It's hard to grasp that other investors have different goals than we do, because an anchor of psychology is not realizing that rational people can see the world through a different lens than your own. Rising prices persuade all investors in ways the best marketers envy. They are a drug that can turn value-conscious investors into dewy-eyed optimists, detached from their own reality by the actions of someone playing a different game than they are. Being swayed by people playing a different game can also throw off how you think you're supposed to spend your money. So much consumer spending, particularly in developed countries, is socially driven, subtly influenced by people you admire, and done because you subtly want people to admire you. Author says, a takeaway here is that few things matter more with money than understanding your own time horizon, and not being persuaded by the actions and behaviors of people playing different games than you are. The main thing I can recommend is going out of your way to identify what game you're playing. The seduction of pessimism. Optimism is the best bet for most people, because the world tends to get better for most people most of the time. But pessimism holds a special place in our hearts. Pessimism isn't just more common than optimism. It also sounds smarter. It's intellectually captivating, and it's paid more attention than optimism, which is often viewed as being oblivious to risk. Before we go further, we should define what optimism is. Real optimists don't believe that everything will be great. That's complacency. Optimism is a belief that the odds of a good outcome are in your favor over time, even when there will be setbacks along the way. The simple idea that most people wake up in the morning trying to make things a little better and more productive than wake up looking to cause trouble is the foundation of optimism. It's not complicated. It's not guaranteed either. It's just the most reasonable bet for most people, most of the time. Pessimism just sounds smarter and more plausible than optimism. Tell someone that everything will be great, and they're likely to either shrug you off or offer a skeptical eye. Tell someone they're in danger and you have their undivided attention. Author says, if a smart person tells me they have a stock pick that's going to rise tenfold in the next year, I will immediately write them off as full of nonsense. If someone who's full of nonsense tells me that a stock I own is about to collapse because it's an accounting fraud, I will clear my calendar and listen to their every word. When you'll believe anything. Appealing fictions and why stories are more powerful than statistics. There are two things to keep in mind about story-driven world. The more you want something to be true, the more likely you are to believe a story that overestimates the odds of it being true. Everyone has an incomplete view of the world, but we form a complete narrative to fill in the gaps. Author says, Daniel Kahneman once told me about the stories people tell themselves to make sense of the past. Hindsight, the ability to explain the past, gives us the illusion that the world is understandable. It gives us the illusion that the world makes sense even when it doesn't make sense. That's a big deal in producing mistakes in many fields. Most people, when confronted with something they don't understand, do not realize they don't understand it because they're able to come up with an explanation that makes sense based on their own unique perspective and experiences in the world. However limited those experiences are, we all want the complicated world we live in to make sense. So we tell ourselves stories to fill in the gaps of what are effectively blind spots.